Therapy is about your past. Who hurt you? How did your parents hurt you? How did your ex hurt you? How does that make you feel? Coaching's about the future. What are you doing now? We got a big old whiteboard looking at the rest of your life, whether you're 40 or 50 or 60. Let's look at the rest of your life. We got 30, 40 years up ahead to do some really extraordinary things. What are you going to do with those years? Are you going to share it with someone and build something that's bigger than you, or are you going to keep on doing what you're doing? Hey, this is Evan Marcotte, dating coach for smart, strong, successful women, your personal trainer for love. Welcome back to the Love You podcast, a place where you can learn everything there is to know about dating, relationships, sex, and men from a man's point of view. Today, we're going to be talking about why dating is different when you get older. We're going to go through the decades and talk about how it's different in each phase. I have no idea how long this is going to take. It may be longer than usual, so strap yourself in. If you enjoyed today's podcast, make sure you give us a positive review on Apple or Spotify, either 5 stars or take the time to write something nice. If you are a regular listener, please share it with a friend who might need to hear some of this right now, a friend who will not be offended that you're sending her podcast about dating and relationships. And if you're serious about Love You and want to find a long-term relationship instead of just listening to podcasts, going to therapy, and reading books, I'll tell you at the end of the podcast how you could apply. So let's establish a few things. Number one, I started doing this when I was 31 years old. I am now 51 years old. I am the OG dating coach, doing it longer than anybody. I got more success stories of happily married couples on my website than other people have actual clients. And I'm really proud of that I made up a career, and I've been fortunate enough to be able to sustain it for years. And that could be a strength. It could be a weakness. What I will candidly share, of course, is that as a coach for 20 years, as a married man for the past 15, I have not dated in 15 years, 17 years actually. And so I have never been on a dating app. I couldn't be. That would be kind of shitty to do to my wife. I have not used text as a primary form of communication. However, I've been coaching women for all the time who have been, so I'm still very much in touch with what you're going through. So I say that as a means of establishing that I am of a certain age, and as I've gotten older, my clients have gotten older as well. I'm not saying this is good or bad. If anything, I still get a great rush out of helping women in their 30s fall in love, get married, start families when there's a sense of urgency. Unfortunately, those women usually don't call me until they're 39. Very rarely do they call me when they're 31. But the majority of my clients used to be like around my age. There was sort of this bell curve. Half of them were under the age of 45 and half of them were over the age of 45. That curve has moved along with my age, where now I'm going on a Love You retreat with 12 of my clients, I think next week. And I would say that the average age of the women on this retreat is 63. I didn't actually average it out, but there's definitely a bias towards women who are a little bit older, who have been divorced, whose kids are out of the house, who have money and are lacking in love, not people who are first building their careers. So I hope whoever is listening that you realize that I have had clients like you before, and that I intimately understand what you're going through and the unique challenges. But the reason I'm doing this podcast very specifically is because I sometimes get criticism, which you always got to listen to criticism. And I get criticism of, why don't you do something very specifically for 70-year-old widows? Right? Dating's very different at age 70 than it is at 60. I'm not going to create an entire Love You course for 70-year-old widows. And I'm not going to create an entire Love You course for 39-year-old women whose biological clock is ticking. What I will say, defiantly and candidly, is that dating and relationship advice is like 95% the same for everybody, because it's about confidence and self-awareness and boundaries and fixing your broken man picker and having better taste and knowing what's going to make you happy and how to operate from a place of confidence and abundance. Those things cut across generations. And the difference between generations are relatively small, which is why we're going to be able to breeze through them in hopefully a 20-minute podcast. So if you're someone who's like, you need to do something specifically for me, I'm doing it in this podcast. Otherwise, Love You, I promise, is good enough for you. So when you're in your 20s, I don't think we have too many listeners in their 20s, but if you are in your 20s, or if your parents sent you this podcast to listen to, you're in a different phase of life, and 20s are kind of the new 30s and so on. There's a sort of prolonged adolescence where people are, the fact that there's a word called adulting means it's delayed from when it used to be. There's less likely to have it all figured out in your 20s. And I think it's really important to allow people in their 20s not to have to transcend their generation, to recognize that, when I was a kid, my mom had me when she was in her early 20s. My dad was already owning a home in his early 20s. It was a different time. I didn't get my act together until I was 35. And so your 20s is a time of exploration. It's a time where there's a really active social scene, meaning that lots of people are single. Most of your friends are not married with kids, fully established yet. So 20s is when everybody leaves college and is trying to figure out what to be when they grow up. And that includes figuring out what your career looks like. It includes sowing your oats and having sex and making mistakes and leading with chemistry and getting your heart broken and moving cities. And there's a lot of change. I found the 20s to be an extremely difficult decade personally. And especially if you have the mindset that I have, which is kind of a perfectionist mindset, trying to get it right instead of realizing, oh, this is the time to get things wrong. This is the time to experiment. This is the time that I don't have the responsibilities of a mortgage and kids and that kind of thing. And so you have some advantages, right? There is less pressure. You don't have to know. You can do casual. You can make mistakes without the same sort of consequences. Most people are still single. So there's a lot of people out there to date. That number goes down. As of this morning, the statistic I read is still 75% of people are married by the age of 40. That leaves you 25% of the dating pool to start with when you're older. And so that's something to recognize. It's a good time to date, but it may be hard to find someone to settle down with because people aren't as mature. I can understand wanting people to be mature. You may be mature. Your career might be together. You might be ready for the real deal and not want to be part of, drinking culture or hookup culture or, building my brand as an influence culture, and you want to, step into adulthood. But a lot of your peers are not going to be there yet. And so it's owning that and recognizing that your dating pool is limited by where everybody is in their career. The real shit starts to go down when you're in your 30s. And when you're in your 30s is the time that the dominoes start to fall or the pieces start to come together. People come closer to landing in their career. I did not have a career until I was 31. I mentioned it many times here. This is where the dreams start to become a reality. And if you've been working your way up a corporate ladder, you've hopefully gotten to places and you've gotten promotions and you've gotten more responsibility and you've got a little bit more money and you've gone through the mistakes of your 20s and learned from them and pivoted on them and refined your tastes in people and how you travel, in how you decorate your home, in how you talk. There's no substitute for life experience. So when people get their act together in their 20s, I'm really envious. I think it's amazing. But 30s is where it starts to happen. If you're a woman in your 30s and you're listening, highly encourage you to start taking your love life seriously when you're in your early 30s, not your late 30s. Your early 30s are the prime dating years. And I say that not as a scare tactic. I say that as your older brother or a guy who could be almost as your dad. Like, this is, 30 to 35 is the peak of your powers. You're the most desirable to men. You could have men 25. You could have men 50. Everybody is crazy about someone in their early 30s because you are a woman, because you are mature, because you have life experience, and because you are also, for guys who want that, at your most youthful and fertile. Technically, you are in your 20s, but at the same time, it doesn't matter because most people don't have their act together in their 20s. So early 30s is a great time to start taking dating seriously, and your priorities get clear. But the pressure on the other side of that is on the latter half of your 30s. There is, for people who want to have families, a very real biological clock. And I don't like people to panic about it. I'll always give the statistic that you have close to an 80% chance of getting pregnant at age 38, right? When you account that in a given month, you have about a 5% chance to get pregnant month after month after month. You add those together over a year. If everybody's fertility is right, you have a good chance of getting pregnant in your late 30s. But that number starts to drop off a cliff afterwards. And if you're trying to start to date, to find a man to fall in love with and build a life with and move in with and get engaged to and get married and then start to having kids. So 38 turns into 41 really, really quickly if you find the right guy at 38. Again, I don't say that as a scare tactic. I say it because it's real. A lot of men who are 38 are going to understandably look for women who are under 35 to buy themselves a little bit more time and not have to rush into it, says the guy who rushed because he married a 38-year-old woman who had kids at age 41 and 42 without IVF just under the wire. So the biological constraints, unfortunately, are real and should be heeded. It is always heartbreaking to me when I get clients who want to have 2 kids and are reaching out to me when they're 41 years old, thinking that just because they have frozen eggs, that this is the insurance policy that's going to make it all better. It's better than nothing, but the dating pool is going to change if you are in your late 30s. The people that are going to be the best fit for you in your late 30s are probably going to be divorced men who want to have children or willing to have other children. You're not going to find too many first-timers because those first-timers are largely going to try to choose women who don't have kids if they're starting their first family. And that is a reality that is worth speaking. It does not work across the board, but this is one of the many ways that the 30s are important and fraught time. So you also have this effect where you realize you got one chance to make this right. It's not like someone who's, 50 or 60. We get into a time where we want to get this so perfect because we got one shot that perfectionism often leads us to make bad decisions. We become maximizers rather than satisficers. We become so afraid of settling that we end up staying alone. And this is what afflicted me in my 30s when I was going out with hundreds of people from online dating. There was always someone else. And again, this is pre-dating apps, just conventional dating sites. There was always someone else. People became really, really disposable. There was always a good, valid reason to pass someone up. And then at a certain point you look up, and I looked up and I was 34 and I was giving dating advice and I was not living my dating advice because I was overvaluing someone who was the female version of me. And I was undervaluing someone who was a good complementary fit to my life. And that's something that was a very hard won lesson. So hopefully in your 30s, you're learning to find a person who is a complement and not a clone. If you are out there dating 3 guys a week, finding something wrong with everybody and looking for the male version of you, it is time to learn that lesson because the window, unfortunately, is not open forever. And that is, again, something that needs to be said. In your 40s, well, we've got 2 kinds of women. We've got the women who didn't find their right guy, that ballpark 25% of women who haven't met the right guy at any point prior and are still looking to fall in love and start a family, or just looking to fall in love and build a life with a guy and feel like they're out on the outside looking in with a smaller dating pool of available men. And then there are the people who made the wrong choices in their 20s and 30s who are now coming on the market again and getting divorced. I think divorce has a bad rap. I'm not pro or anti-divorce, but I don't think someone being divorced is a crime. I think it means that someone made a mistake and had the courage to undo a mistake rather than doubling down on it. If anything, I feel worse for the people who were married for 30 years but were miserable for 25 of them than for someone who was married for 5 years and got out when they realized, I don't want to waste my life on this person. So I don't look askance at people who are divorced. A lot of people make questionable decisions when they're younger, when they're more immature, when they're driven by attraction, when they don't have much life experience, when they don't have healthy boundaries or healthy role models when they're younger. And so the 40s is where this all sort of shakes out. And then you realize in your 40s, everybody has baggage. And most of the people who wanted to have kids already have had kids at this point. So now we're dealing with being step parents and co-parenting and childcare arrangements and alimony. And it does just get messier. And that's unfortunate, but there's no way around that. There's no way to escape from that time of life. And if you're a woman who wants to start her own family, and most of the guys who are the good, husband, father guys have kids, you don't want that. You don't want to marry into someone else's family. And I completely get that. And I think that's sort of the harder part, is that that's a good portion of the dating pool are divorced men with families at that age. And so now we're more fully formed. I use these blunt metaphors and comparisons to make complex ideas feel a little simpler. One of the things I usually point out, especially when you're young, is that every 5 years you change a lot. There's a huge difference between 15 and 20. And there's a huge difference between 20 and 25. And there's a huge difference. And every 5 years you could look back and there's a huge difference between me at age 30, penniless, unemployed, clinically depressed, and 35, 2 books in stores, married, making a good living, right? My life changed in 5 years. And then 5 years later, 40 years old, 2 kids, house in the suburbs, really just different stages of life. At a certain point, that starts to plateau, right? When you have your career in place, when you have a lot of things in place and there's not as much change going on. So now people are a little clearer on who they are. They've established their identity. When you cross 40, I think a lot of people over 40 could vouch for this, is you come more into yourself. I think you become a better version of yourself than you were in your 20s and your 30s. At least I hope you have, that you're the accumulation of all of these previous experiences. And so then people become better versions of themselves, but they also might get a little stuck in their version of themselves. And it makes partnership a little hard to have, especially if you haven't partnered up before. We realize when we reach our 40s, choosing someone because they're the same religion is not the best idea. Choosing someone because of butterflies and attraction is not the best idea. We realize the importance of compromise. We realize the importance of communication. We realize the importance of shared values, things that, weren't as interesting when you thought life was liking the same band and smoking close cigarettes, or, that he was the best sex you ever had. Again, not to take anything away from the best sex you've ever had, but very few people have had the best sex they've ever had with their spouse. In your 50s, I work with a lot of people in their 50s. Many of them are empty nesters or about to be empty nesters. People with teenage kids who's they put their heart and their soul into raising their kids. Their kids are more independent. They're starting to drive. They want to spend more time with their friends. They don't need mom as much anymore. And now you've got this established career, a really well-established career. And maybe you got some money in the divorce settlement, and maybe you're kind of on cruise control. And when you look up, you're like, I have a void in my life. I have everything. I raise my kid. I love my kid. I'm proud of my kid. And I don't mean to make this about kids or keep on going back to that, but that's a very common story. Even if we remove divorce and kids from it, you'll have someone who's nurtured their career. And then they wake up and they're 55 and they've got, $1 million plus in the bank, and they have no one to share it with. And they look around their friends with their families who are looking at their empty nests and starting to travel. And they're wondering, well, when do I get mine? So either you put your heart and soul into raising your children, or you put your heart and soul into your work, or both. But usually in their 50s is when women start to look and become a little bit more introspective about what's important in life. And most people, it's not important to have 15% body fat. It's not important to have another $19 cocktail at the Four Seasons, to be able to have, do the perfect pigeon pose or ski a black diamond. Those are all things that are fun, but they're fun that fills time, and it's a distraction. but it's not the same as the connectivity of what it's like to be in love and have a shared life and someone to come home to, someone who makes the good times better and makes the bad times better as well. And so people often get in touch with their emotions at this point in time, where they've had all this relationship experience, right? And they've learned from it, and they're sort of in this holding ground. I don't want to get hurt. I don't want to waste time. I know the mistakes I've made. And there's generally a sort of sense of paralysis. Can you teach an old dog new tricks? Forgive you the use of the word old. I'm in my 50s too, but can you teach an old dog new tricks? Do I have to spend the rest of my life alone? Right? Am I going to let this baggage impact me? The fact that I've been divorced twice now, the fact that when I go online, I keep on going for the bad boys and I don't choose guys who value me, and the guys who seem to value me seem to be pretty lame and losers, and I don't value them. And, is this even possible? So this is where a lot of the existential crisis comes in for my clients. And then there's the women in their 60s, and I could extend it to their 70s as well. But this is when those women are starting to face retirement. I'm thinking of one client in particular who was telling me last week about her dates, and she goes, like, when I was 60, no one mentioned the word retirement. Now that I'm 63, everybody's talking about retirement. It's like things really start to change, and people are looking towards the future. What now? What next? At this point, most people's kids are out of their house. Most people, my clients, not everybody, a good portion of people are not in the position to retire. So I don't want to be glib about that. But a lot of my clients are in the position to consider retiring, and they don't know what replaces it, right? And work gives them a lot of structure. Work gives them a lot of meaning. And they also know they don't want to be busting their ass for 10 hours a day and well into their 70s. And so there's this focus on retirement, and almost everything's on the table. I don't need to stay in this house because the kids are out of the house. I don't need to stay in this neighborhood. I don't need to, so you have this, it's almost like graduating college. You got this sort of blank slate. What am I going to do with my life? I can move anywhere, but where is that? What's going to make me happy? So this is the stuff that really interests me. And Arthur Brooks' book, From Strength to Strength, talks about what happens in your 50s and beyond, and looking at the second half of your life and what you're going to do with it and how it's different. And so now you're dealing with a different dating population. You might be dealing with people who are widows and widowers for the first time. My dad died when he was 53. My mom was a 51-year-old widow. That's extremely young, but it's more and more common for people to lose people in that time frame. Also 50s and 60s, a lot of people are taking care of elderly parents and saying goodbye. So it's a time of great loss and transition. You lose your job, you lose your kids to their independence and their adulthood. And so there's a lot of change that happens in your 60s. And there's also, in that change, a focus on happiness. Not all studies, but many studies talk about the idea that because we're less focused on work and because we're less focused on our children, we have more time for self-fulfillment. To take the pottery class that you always wanted, to teach yourself to play guitar, to travel more, to play golf or cards with your girlfriends. My mom has been retired for a long time. She really, really loves being retired. She loves her freedom, and she loves doing her Sudoku and making art and doing her canasta games and doing yoga at the pool at the club in the 55 older community. And now she's in an amazing relationship as well. So there's a different time of life. But this is where people are really thinking, is this it? Where am I going to be when I'm 70 and 80 and 90? And who's going to be taking care of me? Right? And this is where women get worried about becoming the nurse with the purse. Because if you're dating guys, and a lot of men are looking for younger women, not older women, so you're forced with the prospect of, yeah, I'm willing to date older, but how much older before he drops off while I'm sort of healthy and vibrant? And so we discover in our 60s and 70s, people aren't as attractive, right? A lot of women complain there's no attractive guys. Well, yeah, they're not going to look like they did when they're 30 and 40. And so you're going to have guys who are a little bit more frail and a little bit more balding and a little more white-headed and a little more pot-bellied, because it's what happens to men as they get older. And then there's challenges around sex, and there's challenges around money and retirement and health. And so it's a whole different ball game than certainly where we're starting the podcast talking about our 20s, but we're still left with the same dating and relationships dynamic, right? We're dealing with men and we're dealing with women and we're dealing with what it means to love and be loved and to accept someone and tolerate someone and to take care of them and to extend courtesy to them and to prioritize them and to put their needs first and to compromise. And so these are all universal things that come up whether you are 25 or whether you're 75. And so anytime, and where I started this podcast, when you say, well, can this guy help me? I hope by the fact that I just rattled that off basically without notes means that this is really routine. It's like asking a physician, can you advise on health with a yearly physical with someone who's 25 versus someone who's 65? And the answer is yes. You see the same conditions over and over and over again. And even though people are at different phases of life, their questions are valid, and their cohort, the people they're dating, changes along with them, and their needs change along with them. And so it's all about addressing your needs in this moment. It's not looking back at what you should have or could have done. I talk to a lot of women who lament the choices they made, staying too long in their marriage with the wrong guy, not putting themselves out and dating sooner, still giving into the old impulses of being with emotionally unavailable men who treat you poorly. And there's no point in beating yourself up for that. The past is the past. The beauty of coaching, which was what makes it different than therapy. Therapy is about your past. Who hurt you? How did your parents hurt you? How did your ex hurt you? How does that make you feel? Coaching's about the future. What are you doing now? We got a big old whiteboard, right? Looking at the rest of your life, whether you're 40 or 50 or 60. Let's look at the rest of your life. We got 30, 40 years up ahead to do some really extraordinary things. What are you going to do with those years? Are you going to share it with someone and build something that's bigger than you, or are you going to keep on doing what you're doing? If you want to build something that's bigger than you, because you have 20, 30 years ahead of you, even though you're older, please give me a call. My name is Evan Markatz. I'm a dating coach for smart, strong, successful women who have everything but the man. Go to evanmarkatz.com/apply. Put in your name, put in your email address, fill out an application for Love You. And at the end of the conversation, we'll figure out if you're a good fit for coaching so we can finally get you the relationship that you've deserved for your entire life. And if you enjoy this podcast, please give us a positive review on Apple, give us a positive review on Spotify, tell a friend, subscribe, do the whole thing. And I look forward to our next conversation next week. Take care. Bye-bye.